Hey, I'm Yoad. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to talk about bass and low frequencies in general. When we work on the bass and the kick drum, it's really important to understand what we're listening to. Sometimes the room we are in will have an immense effect on how we're hearing the bass and the low frequencies. A very simple way of understanding the resonances in the room we're mixing in is to play a sine wave through the speakers. And I can do it either by using an oscillator and just listen to when it becomes louder. And that's where the standing wave or the resonance is. The other way is to just play a sine wave on a keyboard. So I can listen to when it becomes louder, and that's the resonant frequency. This room has been calibrated, so I'm not experiencing any kind of discrepancies in level over the different frequencies, but depending on how treated the room is, we can sometimes encounter some boost in the low frequencies, and that depends on the size of the room as well. So smaller rooms will resonate at usually 120, 130. The smaller the room, the higher the frequency is. A larger room will tend to resonate at around 80, 90. Again, it depends on the size of the room, and it's very easy to calculate. I'm not going to get into that now. But a very simple way of doing it is just listening. We don't need any sophisticated software or anything like that. Just listen, and if you can hear that a specific frequency sounds louder, just be aware of that when you're mixing. It doesn't mean that you have to do anything to correct the room or to apply correction curves on the speakers or anything like that, but just be aware of that. So when you come to EQ the bass, think about the resonance you're hearing and try to determine whether it's coming from the room, the speakers, or the actual recorded bass. I've noticed that only around 40% of you guys are actually subscribed to my channel. So if you enjoy my videos and you want to support what I do here, please subscribe. It only takes a second. When we're dealing with synth basses, it's very easy because we know that they're gonna be equal across the keyboard. So if I'm playing any note, it will be at the same level. So if we're hearing any note that sounds louder, we can know that it's not coming from the synth because it's an oscillator and it's just changing the pitch, nothing else changes. And that means we can trust it to be at a constant level across the keyboard. So if we're hearing any notes that are louder than others, we can associate it with either the speakers or room reflections. Now, if we want to verify that, we can use headphones. Although the headphones may not have a flat frequency response, they may resonate in different frequency to the room or the speaker, and that will give us an indication as to where the problem is. So it's just worth being aware of that before resorting to EQs and trying to dip certain frequencies and notes and getting to all that. Usually when I mix, I try to leave the bass alone unless there's a really specific problem. And if there is a problem, it's usually with bass guitars because they will sound different on each note, each fret, each string. And that's fine because we want to have that feel. So the notes may not sound equal, but that's what makes it a bass guitar, as opposed to something like that. Which is very stable, and we can trust this bass. And we know that if we're hearing any notes that sound louder than others, it may be the speakers, it may be the room. And then we can put on headphones or verify it in a different way. Here we have a bass that plays the root note, the fifth, and the octave. So it spans across a wide range of notes, but still it sounds very solid. Because it's a synth bass, so there shouldn't be any discrepancies in level between the note across the entire range. So with synth basses, we can usually just let them be. Obviously, we want to make sure that there's no kind of unnecessary rumble below 50, 40, definitely 30. There's nothing there. So if we want our mix to be tight, we should filter out any frequencies below 30, sometimes 40 hertz, sometimes even 50, depending on the key and the tone of the bass, depending on what the kick drum is doing and the sound of it. This is a bass guitar part from a Nexus expansion I created. And you can hear that the notes are not equal, but that's what makes it live. So here we have tons and tons of bass presets, and the synth bass presets will be equal across the entire range. Now let's look at some kick drums. So here, when I change the pitch, I'm basically playing the sample slower or faster. And the main difference will be actually in the high frequencies because of the Foreman shift. The actual fundamental should just change in a linear way. So when you're mixing your kick drum and you're trying to carve out some resonant frequencies and stuff, make sure that it's not the room or the speakers. And you can do that by just changing the pitch. Because if it changes massively with the pitch, you can be sure it's not the actual sample. Because by doing that, we shouldn't encounter a massive change in volume. So usually I would leave the bass alone as much as possible. I can add some low shelf filter if I wanted to be heavier, but I would try to avoid doing stuff like that, like notches that are specific to certain notes and things like that, because usually it doesn't end well. Once you scoop out too many frequencies, the bass tends to sound hollow, and then you end up adding more lows because you're not feeling the bass, and then you end up with a lot of rumble. We don't need all that. Anything here below 30 is just not necessary. It limits the headroom on the speaker, and there's no music there. So we can usually filter out anything below 30 easily. On the kick as well. Many kick samples come with a lot of rumble here. We just don't need it. It will sound as heavy, if not more, if you filter those out, because it will sound tighter. So it will make the kick and the bass sounding more solid, which will give the feeling of the lows being tighter and more prominent than just having all this air sloshing about. And again, if you're unsure whether the kick is too resonant, rather than starting to cut out some frequencies, because what's happening here is I'm just cutting out the fundamental frequency, which will make the kick weaker. And maybe it's the room or the speakers that are making me believe that this frequency is too high or resonant. And again, a very easy way of verifying that is just shifting the pitch. Because if the resonant frequency shifts with the pitch, we know that it's part of the sample. And if it disappears, we know that it's the room or the speakers. If you found this video useful, you know what to do, and I will see you on the next one.